The much anticipated peace talks between Ukraine and Russia and Turkey have fallen apart after mere minutes. Just how did a massive production result in just 120 minutes of negotiations? But was there at least one bright spot in these failed negotiations? And who is to blame for the failure? Hint, it's not that hard to figure out. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so Russia, the much vaunted peace talks lasted just 2 hours between Ukraine and Russia. Now, what's worth noting is, of course, that Russia sent no one in any kind of foreign relations capacity to the talks. The rough equivalent, I would say, is actually more like sending a secretary. The head of the Russian delegation was actually Vladimir Putin's personal secretary, not a foreign minister, not a commanding general, not a defense minister, an extremely low-level person, someone who had served previously as the Minister of Culture. So this is roughly the equivalent of the United States sending the Secretary of Interior, or a former Secretary of Interior who now has kind of a do-nothing show job to lead a delegation in peace negotiations. This is totally a statement from Russia about how serious they were, but I think people may have held out hope that maybe there was going to be some sort of scenario in which this low-level delegation was permitted to make small good faith measures, and that a higher-level delegation might come in the future, and they may build towards something meaningful. But again, Ukraine had Zelensky himself show up, and his delegation was led by the Ukrainian Minister of Defense. So while one side sent very serious power players with real authority, the Russians sent a delegation with almost no decision-making authority in the Russian government. But what's even worse is that this group, who is totally not empowered, was still willing or ordered to make absolutely preposterous demands of Ukraine for a mere ceasefire, right? Ukraine has reported that, quote, a number of Russian demands were unacceptable. Some leaked reporting indicates that the actual demands were that Ukraine, as a condition of a ceasefire, that Ukraine withdraw from all contested territories. And what's worth noting is that this includes Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson. But here's what's worth noting. You can see on the map here, let's see if we can get a good angle. Right here, the Russians only control about 60% of Kherson. They control only about 50% of Zaporizhzhia. They control almost all of Donetsk Oblast, or excuse me, they control almost all of Luhansk Oblast, and about 70% of Donetsk Oblast. So these are regions that are far from contested, far from established as being under Russian control, and yet the Russians are out here demanding Ukraine withdrawal as a condition for a ceasefire, right? Which, bear in mind, guys, a ceasefire, there is no guarantee that a ceasefire is going to result in a permanent, sustained peace. Instead, it's likely that Russia simply wants Ukraine to withdraw, and then Russia will resume its offensives in areas where there is no contested, where there's no established Ukrainian defenses, right? It's just going to restart the war with Russia having made the equivalent, honestly, of about 3 years of progress based on kind of the current rate of advance. That they simply want to extract concessions for nothing, right? Because again, imagine if Ukraine was to go and say, we'll give you an acre of territory for every acre of territory you withdraw from, right? That would be an example of kind of a neutral stance. And again, it's worth noting that the Russians have not made substantial progress, right? There's this consensus that Russia, because they're on the offensive, therefore they are making progress while the Ukrainians aren't. But the truth is that the Russian progress is so slow that at the current rate, in order to take Kiev, Moscow would need something like 600 to 800 years of continuous fighting. And while Russia actually has allegedly told Ukraine, yeah, we're willing to do that. Let's see if we can find it here. Reportedly, Kiev was threatened with literally eternal war. The source said, Russia threatened Ukraine with eternal war during peace talks in Istanbul today, according to a source from the Kiev delegation. The source said that the Russians were not ready to talk about the technical details of a ceasefire and were waiting for superiors to approve them. This is one of the reasons why the authority of a delegation that goes is more than just a symbol, right? It is a symbol of how committed a side is to talks and how serious they are about them. But it is also, in practical terms, the closer you are to the president, the easier it is to make those kind of calls, especially somewhere like Russia, where your proximity to Vladimir Putin and your authority within the Russian state, because while Vladimir Putin is the authority from which all power flows in Russia, Russia still maintains a legalistic framework, right? And so the both formal and informal authority that an individual has in the system is a function of their position. And so the fact that who they sent was a secretary meant that the secretary simply was unable to discuss any kind of official details of a ceasefire and simply had to wait for superiors to approve them. And bear in mind, guys, that it's not like Russia has 60 other more important things going on, right? Their war in Ukraine has killed 1 million Russians. So this is not something where, oh, well, we got to wait because Vladimir Putin actually is having another meeting about another even bigger war that he started, right? That's not the case here. There is no larger foreign policy priority. Vladimir Putin waiting for your superiors to approve is code for we aren't really making this discussion a priority, right? We literally haven't made people, they're not only did Lavrov and Putin not show up to these delegations, they literally just turned off their cell phones and went golfing so that they couldn't even be reached as they went on, right? And honestly, the fact that you don't even have your cell phone on, is an indicator, something you do when it's a performance, right? When you send a delegation, you tell them, listen, guys, just go, shake their hands, don't agree to anything at all, and send me a text when you get back. I'll be out golfing. That's literally the instructions this delegation clearly got. And the fact that this is so publicly discussed in these terms is a sign that is the message they want you to send. Vladimir Putin barely even considers this worth discussing, right? Of course, Moscow made demands that were unrealistic and far beyond anything ever discussed. Again, this is likely the withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from these regions. This is something that, again, you notice didn't appear in previous ceasefire iterations. Previous iterations of ceasefire, Russia would say, well, we can't negotiate with Zelensky at all. We need you to hold elections and have new leadership in place. Then they said, oh, well, we actually can't do a ceasefire until the Ukrainians stop receiving arms and ammunition from foreign partners and intelligence sharing. Then they said, oh, actually, we can't do a ceasefire until the Ukrainians promise to stop mobilization entirely. And so this is a moving sort of target, right? The Russians just make shit up. And it's all things that are sort of comically unacceptable to the Ukrainians. Again, imagine if your neighbor was breaking into your house, stealing things from your kitchen, and he said, I'll stop stealing things from your kitchen. You just have to let me annex part of your living room too. I'm already sort of in it. You'd go, well, no, all you want to do is loot my living room without me protesting, and then you're going to resume it. And you go, well, why don't I get to loot your living room? They'd say, no, that's absurd. We'd never agree to that. And you go, well, why is it absurd when I ask that of you, but it's completely reasonable for you to ask that of me? This is, of course, because this isn't serious. Vladimir Putin is here to fight and win a war, right? He wants to win. He wants to win militarily, and he believes he is winning militarily. And so he is in no hurry to make any concessions. He's in no hurry for peace, right? He wants peace, but only the peace of conquest, right? Only the peace of totally defeating Ukraine and then using his massive military might to threaten and coerce other states like the Baltics to simply become puppets under Russia's thumb, much like Belarus. And so this is just, this is everything we'd expect from it. But the other thing is when you understand the why, you know exactly what's going on. And what I think is also interesting is that it appears that President Trump is simply choosing to ignore his failure, right? And you got to love a president who, when the going gets tough, fucking pieces out. Now, before we talk about it, right? If you are not like that, if you're somebody where when things get hard, you get busy, right? Your work is crushing you, your kids need you, and you still are not somebody that goes, well, I guess I can just stop working out. I don't need to train. I don't need to work on my side hustle. I don't need to do these things that I said I was going to do. I'll do them later, right? If you're not that guy, if you're part of the 1% of guys that don't take, oh, I'm busy as an excuse and get it done no matter what, you need Strike Gum, because Strike Gum's made for you, right? Normies, guess what? They have Starbucks. They have $8 Red Bulls at a gas station, right? That's fine. But some of us are don't look to spend a ton of money, but we need that 90 milligrams of caffeine, no sugar, just what you need in every piece of gum, right? Strike Gum gives you the equivalent of 90 milligrams in energy drinks worth of clean energy in a convenient gum package. It goes where you go, right? You put it in your gym bag, you put it in your glove box, you put it in your pocket, and boom, you chew it. You got an energy drink right there, hitting your system, clean energy, no sugar crash. You can't beat it. And we are on Amazon. In fact, we are on Prime, at least for the 5-packs. So check it out. The link is in the description. And you also definitely want to subscribe and save, or get, and don't rip yourselves off, right? Get your subscribe and save every month for a discount. So again, check us out over on strikegum.com or on Amazon. Okay. So here's what I think is interesting and really important. There is some signs of progress, or rather, I'm reluctant to call this progress, but Kiev and Moscow have agreed as a good faith to exchange 1,000 prisoners of war on Friday. Of course, Ukraine proposed an all for all. We get all of our soldiers back. You get all of your soldiers back. But 1,000 is still a lot by prisoner of war exchange standards. But what's worth noting is that this is only noteworthy in scale. The Russians have been routinely exchanging prisoners of war with Ukraine since the start of the conflict. And so this is really not much of a good faith showing, right? This is something that probably would have happened over the next 12 months anyway. And they're likely just simply escalating and moving it forward. And so this is a really low level show of good faith. And again, it's not really that much of a good faith because nobody was anywhere near a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. And of course, there may have been some progress in at least agreeing in principle that the two heads of state should talk. But what's worth noting is that this peace deal, these peace talks were proposed by Vladimir Putin himself. And Zelensky was like, great, I'll show up too. And then he sends a nobody. And what's worth noting, I think this is actually really interesting, is that Moscow, right, in Europe, actually said, listen, we want Moscow to have this 30-day unconditional ceasefire starting May 12th, or we are going to ramp up our sanctions tremendously. And this is speaking Vladimir Putin's language, because Putin believes, as the Soviets did, and as certainly the KGB does, that public statements are performances for the general public. They're the equivalent of going to a movie theater and watching the Avengers. Okay. Whatever the Avengers do on the screen doesn't impact the real world. They are not real. The conflicts are not real. It is professional wrestling. Okay. That is how Russia does public diplomacy, right? When they make a statement, when they give a little show, anything they do in front of a camera is going to be a performance, right? But he understands the language of force, right? Economic force and military force. Those things are the language he speaks. And so Europe said, listen, agree to a ceasefire or we're going to cripple you with sanctions. Vladimir Putin said, listen, we can do you one better. We'll have direct talks with Kiev in Turkey on May 15th. Kiev was like, great, we're happy to have talks. Then they were moved to Friday, yesterday, or today, and then Putin no-showed. And this is something that, again, is just absolutely just really preposterous, right? And what's worth noting is that actually the head of this Russian delegation was actually at what they call the failed 2022 talks in Istanbul. But remember, these talks, the terms that Russia proposed were Ukrainian surrender. The talks were meant to receive a Ukrainian surrender in the conflict. That's what those were. There's this American right that's like, well, we had a chance at peace. No. It was a Ukrainian surrender. The terms were the dismantling of the entire Ukrainian armed forces, the complete surrender of Ukraine's autonomy, the right of Russia to veto any international treaty that Ukraine joins. Again, it would grant Moscow authority over the Ukrainian government's ability to make negotiations. That is what it means to be dominated by another country. When you cannot make agreements without that third country's permission, you are then a vassal state, particularly if you have no military to resist them. So if you choose to do any policy action that Russia doesn't want, Ukraine would be prohibited from having a military that can enforce its independence. And so, again, sending to this negotiation someone who previously went to Istanbul to accept your surrender is absolutely not the is the message itself from Russia. Now, here's what I think is also interesting, right? Remember, the U.S. president said he was going to end the war in 1 day, in 24 hours. We are currently, I think, something like day 120 something. I don't know. But here's what I thought was funny. You can see that despite getting a key policy objective, this is actually as close as President Trump has come to achieving his goal. The two sides are talking. They're meeting together. He doesn't even have a tweet about it. He's like, I would totally show up if I thought it would help. I could totally show up. And you could see he doesn't say anything. He talks about his one big, beautiful bill. He said how highly overrated Bruce Springsteen is. And the Supreme Court is being played by the radical left losers who have no support. The public hates them, and their only hope is intimidation of the court. Again, none of this is wrong. He also says, everyone knows since I said I hate Taylor Swift, she's no longer hot, which is a little weird. Which is pretty weird. So all of those things, anything but talking about his major foreign policy, let's be honest here, failure, at least so far it's a failure. And the fact that he doesn't even acknowledge it, right? You'd think that he would say, we're thrilled these talks are happening. You think he would say things like, we encourage both sides to engage in sincere dialogue. The fact that he didn't say any of those things means that, again, he wants to distance himself from this because it's pretty embarrassing to have failed so epically and, frankly, been humiliated repeatedly by Russia, who has basically bamboozled him, right? Lied to him about the Easter truce, lied to him about the energy infrastructure ceasefire, humiliated him by, again, not showing up to the talks that the U.S. so strongly encouraged. And Trump understands that this is a humiliation because, again, if he was truly didn't understand that he was being played and humiliated by Vladimir Putin, he would have encouraged these talks. He would have had a positive message about them. He would have done some kind of well-wishing. And so this is just a fascinating case study in the fact that even the president knows he's been kind of fucking humiliated by Vladimir Putin and pretty badly outplayed. But it doesn't mean, which I think is insane too, it doesn't mean that he's going to continue to support Ukraine, which, as we've pointed out here, it would achieve one of Vladimir Putin's largest and most important strategic objectives, right? One of the things we've talked about for years on this channel is that Vladimir Putin has a three-pronged approach to defeating Ukraine. The first is on the battlefield, focusing on a war of attrition, using superior Russian manpower and resources to continually grind down the Ukrainian military. Two is to diplomatically isolate Ukraine. This is leveraging his allies like Robert Fico in Slovakia to veto EU support, and also his allies in the Republican Party, primarily the Republican Party, and the American right to discourage further U.S. support to Ukraine. And then finally, of course, public diplomacy to influence the European and American publics to believe that supporting Ukraine is actually not in their interest, that it's cost taxpayers some tremendous amount of money, and that it is a waste of time for them to support it. So by isolating Ukraine and then grinding them down, that is the Russian strategy. And it appears to have worked far better than he could have even thought, given that the U.S. president himself is now saying, well, if Vladimir Putin won't agree to a peace deal, we're just going to abandon Ukraine, thereby giving him everything he wants. It's truly brilliant statecraft, guys. Really, really. The 5D chess just, truly, we should all be in awe of the president's ability to play 5D chess. Actually, I think he's trying to eat the pieces. Anyway, guys, thanks to Bill Collier, Robin Colburn, Gars Martin, Gina Questa, Chris Gorsuch, Francis Karius, Al90, Petro, and Jalen Gao. Thanks to all our lieutenant tier members. Couldn't do it without you guys. And I'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.